My name is Jennifer Carter, and I will be your facilitator this evening. My job is to guide the meeting so that we reach every person who wants to ask questions and that we finish each session on time. I am not affiliated with any tribal or wildlife service branch, and I represent no position on the issues. So now, on to the housekeeping and purpose of our meeting. Housekeeping. First of all, there's ice water at the back of the room. We certainly invite you to help yourselves. And if you do need the restrooms, they are out the back door and to the left. So please feel free at any time. If you haven't registered at the table out in the anteroom, immediately to our right, or my right, we'd appreciate it if you would, and you'll also find an information table there. The meeting's purpose is to provide information and answer questions about the draft annual funding agreement for the National Bison Range Complex. The format will work as described now. Fish and Wildlife Service and tribal representatives will receive and answer public questions about the draft annual funding agreement from 6:30 to 7:30. Then we'll have a break for 15 minutes and resume the question and answer session at 7:45. Then we'll conclude that session at 8:30 and then take another break. And then service and tribal representatives will staff 4 tables around the room, and we believe they'll be around the sides and the rear of the room. 4 tables where you can ask additional questions, excuse me, in a more informal one-on-one situation. This breakout session will last for 1 hour and 15 minutes until 10 p.m., at which point the meeting concludes. Here are the ground rules. Individuals who wish to ask a question during the formal question and answer session will line up next to the microphone, which is placed here in the center. And all questions must be asked within a 2-minute time frame. I have my handy-dandy little timer here, and after the speaker introduces himself or herself, I'll begin the 2-minute timing. I really urge you to ask all of your questions first in a cluster, and then continue your comments if you wish, because at the end of 2 minutes, the bell will ring, and I must intervene and ask you to stop. Representatives will then answer your questions as efficiently as possible. Only actual questions will be answered. Rhetorical questions and comments will not be answered. However, if a person adds comments during their 2-minute period, I will not intervene. Any written comments submitted as a part of the ongoing public comment period are to be submitted to the comment box, which is right there to my right rear corner, to your left rear corner. Great, thank you, Tina. More information, as I mentioned earlier, about the whole project is available in the information table out in the hallway. Individuals who wish to ask a question during the breakout session, when we go to the 4 tables, you just meet at the table where you wish to ask your question. And we encourage you to move from table to table. And if there is more than one person who wishes to ask a question, we ask you to help share the time and make sure that everybody gets a little bit of time to ask questions. During the meeting, no advocacy displays such as banners, signs, shouting slogans, heckling will be permitted. If any such displays occur, I will stop the meeting until the display ceases. Once all the speakers who have asked questions have come up, I'll invite second-time speakers to come to the mic. Finally, I wanted to tell you that in addition to these public meetings, the service will hold an open house at the National Bison Range where people can drop in, review information about the annual funding agreement, and ask questions of service and tribal personnel. The open house will be held on Wednesday, September 22nd. Wednesday, September 22nd from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. and will provide another informal forum for people to learn more about the annual funding agreement. Are there any questions about how we'll proceed tonight? Great. Now I will turn the meeting over to Chairman Matt.
Thank you. And I will say that you did run a pretty tough ship last night, so I want to thank you for that. As she said, my name is Fred Matt, and I have the honor to serve as the Tribal Council Chairman. Some of my colleagues are here tonight, and I just want to say that it's a true honor to serve in this capacity. And as the lead negotiator for this process, once again, I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. And for those of you that were in Polson, I want to thank you for coming down to Missoula also. It's good to see your participation, because that's what this is all about. Those of us that's been working through this process, we're particularly proud that we've made the progress that we have, because all the issues that I know that's in your hearts and that has been worked through, it takes time and it's been a long process. But I'm particularly excited that we've taken the time to do this and to address all those concerns. But I'm more particularly proud that, this is something that is near and dear to the Salish and Kootenai Nation, the Indian people. I said before, it's our ancestors that really owe us honor to, and our children to come, that we do this right and that we give the respect and take the time to do it right, because it'll be them who inherit what we accomplish here and into the future. So it's really for them and all of America. I've heard that used time and time again. This is something that everybody will benefit from into the future. So I'm really proud that we've taken the extra steps to get here. And this is an extra step to provide this opportunity. We started off with some public meetings, and one of them, which I can remember, that we filled the gymnasium in Ronan. And I was really encouraged even by that night, because really the heart of what we're here for is the concerns that the people have, so that we can address them. So the product that we end up with is something that is based on concern and input from the people that are here and that couldn't be here, that for some reason may offer their concerns through the process otherwise. And I feel that this is just the first step in a great relationship. Fish and Wildlife Service is an agency that's not new to the tribes. For years we've worked hand in hand with Fish and Wildlife Service in many biological projects and fish and wildlife projects on the reservation in our homelands, our Aboriginal homelands. So they're not new to the tribe. So we've worked hand in hand with those folks. And so I think this is the first step to a great opportunity for a relationship that will last into the future, to manage or to help manage a successful project like National Bison Weeks. So, and we look forward tonight to answering any additional questions that you may have. I know there's some good questions that came out of the meeting last night. We want to answer those, because we don't want to go forward and look back and say, well, we should have thought of that, or we should have thought of this. So we want to answer those questions. And I also said this with my little humor that, good wine takes a lot of time to, and so I'm glad that we've taken the time that we have. So with that, I want to introduce the staff that's with me up here tonight. To my right, Brian Upton from our legal staff, Clayton Matt, Natural Resources Department Head, and Tom McDonald. For the questions that you may have, we'll share the mic and we'll answer them as best possible for you. So at this time, I would like to introduce to you a dear friend that I've, through this process, I felt like I've gained a great friend in this process, no matter where we go with this. Dr. Rick Coleman, he's the Assistant Regional Director for the National Wildlife Refuge System out of Denver, Colorado, and he can introduce his staff.
Thank you, Chairman Matt. Again, we appreciate the Sandusky Tribe for helping us co-host these very important public meetings. And I appreciate your personal involvement throughout the negotiation process. It's been a long 15 months of hard work. We still have more work to do. And with the help of the public comments, we will make this a better document. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for coming tonight. We really appreciate your interest in this subject. It's a very important subject for all of us. The purpose of this meeting and the one last night in Polson is to give you an opportunity to gather more information so that you can make meaningful comments to us regarding the draft annual funding agreement that we've laid before you for a 90-day public comment period. That comment period ends October 11th. So we have this opportunity tonight to answer your questions so that you can provide meaningful comments to us for our consideration. With me tonight is several Fish and Wildlife Service personnel and a member of the Department of Interior Solicitor's Office. To my immediate left is Steve Callan, the Refuge Manager for the National Bison Range, Nine Pipe, Pablo, and other refuges in that complex. Next to him, Steve Berenson, the Refuge Supervisor for all the National Wildlife Refuges in Montana, Wyoming, and Utah. And at the end, Al Kaczynski, the Department of Interior Solicitor in Denver, who was part of our negotiation team. I'd like to reiterate a few things before we get started. Some things that came up last night I'd like the opportunity to kind of point out in my opening remarks, and then we open the floor for questioning. First of all, I'd like to have you understand that the Bison Range, the National Bison Range, Nine Pipe and Pablo National Wildlife Refuges are part of the National Wildlife Refuge System, a system of lands set aside for wildlife and wildlife habitat across the United States. This system began in 1903, 101 years ago, at Pelican Island National Wildlife Refuge on the Atlantic coast of Florida, in the direct path of Hurricane Francis, and it was hit pretty hard last weekend. Pelican Island was set aside to protect colonial nesting birds, particularly pelicans, by Teddy Roosevelt. Since then, we've established over 540 national wildlife refuges across the country in every state. Montana has 16, 17 national wildlife refuges. All of the states have them. North Dakota has the most because we concentrate a lot of refuge there for nesting waterfowl. We have refuges as far west as Guam, as far east as Puerto Rican Islands and the state of Maine, coastal Maine, as far south as American Samoa in the southern hemisphere, and up beyond the Arctic Circle, Arctic National Wildlife Refuges are farthest north refuge. The Bison Range, established in 1908, was established specifically to protect and sustain American bison in perpetuity. At that time, there was about 100 wild bison left in the wild, and others in captivity, either fenced in or in zoos. The National Bison Range was established by a concerned group of citizens, the American Bison Society, who wanted bison to be protected and preserved in perpetuity. Nearly 100 years later, we have a very healthy herd of bison at the National Bison Range in keeping with that original mission. This annual funding agreement provides an opportunity for the Salish Kootenai tribe to participate in various activities at the National Bison Range, Nine Pipe and Pablo National Wildlife Refuge, including an array of programs in maintenance, biology, visitor services, fire management. The Fish and Wildlife Service will retain, as required by the Refuge Administration Act, will retain the management oversight of these refuges, including the management oversight of those programs on the Bison Range, because there is another law, the National Wildlife Refuge Administration Act, that says that only the Fish and Wildlife Service can administer or manage a national wildlife refuge. And that's what we've been doing, and that's what we're required to do by this law. Another law, the Self-Governance Act, says that where we have Department of Interior programs in the vicinity of self-governance tribes that have a customary use or within their reservation, the tribes have an opportunity to request to perform some of the program services and functions that the Department of Interior agency is doing in that area. And that's what brought us here tonight. Those activities that are offered through this draft AFA have been negotiated with Salish Kootenai tribe under the auspices of that law. At the same time, we must administer the Refuge Administration Act and adhere to that law as well. We have done our very best to jointly administer both laws simultaneously in this negotiation. None of us is as smart as all of us. And by that I mean all of you and the American public. And so we have negotiated and done the best we can to put our thoughts and our concerns on paper for you to review. Now we need your thoughts, your consideration, your ideas voiced in comments to us so that we can consider them and make this a workable, successful document and a workable, successful annual funding agreement. And so the purpose tonight is to answer questions and concerns so that you can then submit comments that will be helpful to all of us. Thank you.
We're now ready for our question and answer period. And I will call for our first speaker. If you'll come to the microphone. Thank you, sir. Come to the microphone, and once the person has introduced himself or herself, I'll begin the clock. At the time the 2-minute clock goes off, if a person is still speaking, I'll just rise from my chair and politely ask the person to finish. Thank you.
Ready? Okay, my name is Jack Renault, a local citizen taxpayer concerned about this AFA. Now, in 1903, the refuge was founded by Theodore Roosevelt, who also was a great proponent of the Civil Service Act. And all the jobs and everything since this refuge system was founded has been civil service, and which means it's been inherently federal. And so I don't understand. I'd like to explain to me how suddenly some of these jobs are considered not inherently federal. We're talking about wildlife biologists, we're talking about maintenance. Everybody, information specialists, had to go through the civil service system to get this job, and suddenly they don't have to do that anymore. Next is, how is there a conflict between what you already talked about, the enforcement of the administration of the National Wildlife Refuge System Administration Act and all its amendments, and the Indian Self-Determination and Educational Assistance Act? I mean, you're saying that that the Fish and Wildlife Service is responsible, and all of a sudden we're giving away 11 jobs. How many Indian tribes have called the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service asking for a duplicate of the National Bison Range Agreement at other refuges? Where are those refuges located? And I understand that there have been several other tribal nations seeking this information. And how can any national refuge job, especially jobs in those critical areas, again, not be considered anything but inherently federal? Okay, finally, since the Federal Register lists 34 national parks, 41 national refuges, and numerous federal water projects as possible public lands to be considered, and it also says, and others that are not mentioned, under the Self-Determination Act, how could this agreement be applied to those negotiations?
Okay, the first one seemed to be a question about civil service employees, federal employees under the Civil Service, protected under the Civil Service Act, how all of those jobs relate to the term inherently federal. The purpose of that question is that annual funding agreements, wherever they are, cannot include programs, services, and functions that are inherently federal. That must remain with the federal agency, including ours. So the question is, what part of our programs, services, and functions is not inherently federal? Unfortunately, there is no clear line drawn by anyone in the federal government as to what is or is not inherently federal. It apparently is so unique to each situation that that determination must be made on a case-by-case basis. We have done our very best to do that in this instance, for this negotiation. The fact that each of our employees are hired under a federal employment process and following civil service would not automatically mean necessarily that everything that they do must be inherently federal. We have made that determination. And you're certainly welcome to comment on that, but we have made that determination. We have laid out activities in this draft AFA that we have concluded are not inherently federal and therefore are available for the tribe to do under an annual funding agreement. Are there other programs, services, and functions that the services retain that are also not inherently federal? I'm not sure about that. Have we fully retained all inherently federal functions? We believe that we have. How does this jive with the second question? How is this in accordance with the National Wildlife Refuge Administration Act of 1966, with lots of amendments since then? As I said in my opening comments, we have been very concerned about that from the get-go. We believe that also speaks to inherently federal. And the Refuge Administration Act clearly states that any and all national wildlife refuges must be managed, administered, controlled, whatever verb you would like to use, by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, not by any other agency in the Department of Interior, not by any other entity. And so that has been tested time and time again in court, and we've retained those responsibilities. How many Indian tribes have expressed an interest in similar annual funding agreements? There is one that's in place in Alaska, Yukon Flats National Wildlife Refuge, with the Athabascan tribe. That annual funding agreement was negotiated last year and concluded this year, and it's in place and was enacted in I believe March or April of this year. You mentioned in your question that there was a Federal Register listing of other Department of Interior parks and refuges and other facilities that could be eligible for similar kinds of activities. 41 national wildlife refuges are listed there. Have there been other instances where tribes have been interested in this? Yes. Are they interested in our draft agreement? Yes. They're also interested in the Yukon Flats agreement. They're looking at both. It's out for public review, and it's available for use. How would this agreement be applied? In every instance, the tribe must negotiate with the Fish and Wildlife Service officials at that site. The regional office and the on-site managers participated in a similar way that we did a negotiating process. Is there some opportunity for differences among AFAs? Absolutely. it's on a case-by-case basis. And so I hope I've answered your questions.
Can I ask, since I didn't use my 2 minutes?
You actually used them up. It came right out perfect time. But we'll be coming back. Do we have another speaker who wishes to ask questions?
I'm Susan Renaud. Since this is an annual funding agreement, I am amazed that a 57-page annual funding agreement does not include any specifics on funding, nor does it specify the jobs that are in question. So the questions that I'm going to be asking you are related mostly to funding. What are the exact titles and job descriptions impacted by this annual funding agreement, and what will these jobs cost, as well as what it will cost to administer this contract in all aspects, both the negotiation process and the amount of time that's been put into this, as well as the actual contract being put into place and any other expenses associated with administering this contract. Last night you said you didn't have those figures, and I'm frustrated by that because we're almost finished with the public comment period. It's really hard to comment when you don't have anything to comment on. Secondly, how much will the CSKT be paid by the Bureau of Indian Affairs for the contract coordinator's job, and costs from other federal government agencies to support the efforts of this contract? I understand that there are other agencies that are contributing money. I'd like to know how much that is, since we, the taxpayers, are footing the bill. The annual wild bison roundup is coming up, and it's a very dangerous activity. And I am again asking you to clarify how it is that contract workers would not be in charge of their own liability if they're not properly and adequately trained, and also how does this liability impact volunteers? Why is the CSKT best to run the National Bison Range Complex?
Thank you. First, that's right.
The one question that you had about how much the BIA will be putting into to pay for the coordinator, I'm not aware of any. Incidentally, I want to introduce myself also as a taxpayer, but I'm not aware of any. So unless.
Okay, I wrote down the questions as best I could, so we'll do our best to answer them. Jobs and job descriptions affected by this annual funding agreement. Pursuant to the law and the regulations, negotiations on any annual funding agreement need to be focused on programs, services, and functions, not on positions. So in our negotiations, we negotiated activities, program services, functions that are done that are not inherently federal, and negotiated what those are, what they entail, and things like that. When it comes around to how much can the government provide to perform these program services and functions, the most obvious place to look for what that cost would be the salary and benefits of the people who are currently doing those program services and functions. And so that's where you bring in the position, so to speak, as to what does it currently cost us to do those things. You know, that cost is estimated based on salary and benefits of the people who perform those functions. So we don't have any specific job description of any position, but we have the list in Attachment A of the things that would be done under this agreement. So to the extent that that you've asked for a job description, it would be all those program services and functions that are listed in attachment A that we collectively call capital A activities. The cost to administer, the cost of negotiating this agreement, the startup costs are all important information. We are still in the process of getting a final answer on that. As I expressed last night, in response to Senator Burns, we are developing that sort of information, and it's in front of our Washington office now for review and signature to send it to the senator, and at that time it will be available. You should be aware that, as in any startup new venture, new agreement, there are some initial startup costs that are borne the first year that are not reoccurring. And then in subsequent years, there's other ones. A significant part of the startup costs of this agreement are tied to the personnel costs of the affected employees. Affected employees are those employees that currently work for the Fish and Wildlife Service whose work is now tied up with and associated with this annual funding agreement. Those affected employees will be given 4 options to consider at the time the annual funding agreement is signed. We have no idea which of the 4 options each one of those affected employees will take. We fully expect to give those employees as much information as they possibly need to make the best decision for them. One of the options that they have before them is that we promise them to move them to another National Wildlife Refuge in the system and have them continue to work as Fish and Wildlife Service employees at another refuge, wherever practicable. There is definitely a cost associated with moving an employee and their family and their household goods to another refuge. But we don't know if any of them would elect that. The other options are that they become they remain a Fish and Wildlife Service employee under an IPA agreement, an Intergovernmental Personnel Act agreement, in which they stay as a federal employee with all federal benefits and under the federal civil service system, but they are assigned to the Salish Kootenai tribe to perform their activities under the AFA. A third option is that they resign from the Fish and Wildlife Service, become employed by the Salish Kootenai tribe with federal benefits. And the fourth option is that they resign from the Fish and Wildlife Service, become employees of the Salish Kootenai tribe with tribal benefits. The latter 3 options do not have an immediate cost to us as far as relocation. But if they elect to be moved to another refuge, there is that cost. There's some other startup costs associated as well. And we intend to provide that information as soon as possible. The tribal coordinator position, I've asked Steve Callan to look that up because we've identified that in attachment B as a GS11, step 1, with benefits, and the dollar amount of that, Steve,
is approximately $63,600.
I think, Susan, you had asked a question about contract workers and why they're not in charge of their own liability. And the answer to that is that that's how Congress has structured the Tribal Self-Governance Act, and how people that are undertaking federal activities are generally covered by the Federal Tort Claims Act. Right now, all of the employees at the Bison Range are covered by the Federal Tort Claims Act because they're doing federal activities on behalf of the Fish and Wildlife Service, and that's what the tribally contracted workers will be doing as well.
Another speaker, please.
Yes, I didn't get straight on the personnel. I'm a volunteer. I've volunteered for years at the Bison range at the Roundup. Now, my understanding is that if the tribe would take this over as a volunteer, then I would have no protection if I were to injure somebody during the course of the work. And it's my understanding then that volunteers are not covered unless they are under tribe, which can use tribal sovereignty to cover them. That's one question. The other thing is I too have been very concerned and understand that there is a coordinated effort amongst other tribes and a push to pursue for other AFAs. And I would ask Chairman Matt if the Salish-Kootenai tribe has actually coordinated that effort. And the other thing that I am concerned about is who and how was it decided to include the management programs that are included in the AFA.
Thank you.
The question that was presented was, what's the effect on the volunteer at the Bison range? Currently, there's some difference of opinion over the effect on volunteers. And both between the tribe and the department and within the department, I don't think there's a clear answer for that right now. But I have reviewed the law on the subject, and I can't find any coverage of a volunteer working for the tribes. Currently, when a volunteer works for the Fish and Wildlife Service, that volunteer is covered by the Federal Tort Claims Act for any negligent act or omission that might injure someone or someone's property. And that person is not subject to lawsuit. If the volunteer is not covered by the Federal Tort Claims Act, then the United States would not pick up the tab, would not be the insurer against that negligence. And also, another important protection would not be available because the volunteer could be sued individually. Under the Federal Tort Claims Act, only the United States can be sued. An individual employee or a volunteer for the federal government cannot be sued.
This is an issue that was one of the things that we needed to get resolved within the department. When we had finally worked our way through the bulk of the agreement, we had a few remaining issues. This was one of those. Al and I disagree on this. Al's explained his position on volunteer coverage. The tribes and myself, I've also obviously reviewed all the laws involved in the case law. I'm very comfortable that volunteers are covered under the Federal Tort Claims Act. We brought this up to the central office and had them review the same question. And we were told by the department that they're comfortable with our position, and that's why the language remains in there. So we're not concerned that volunteers will be left without coverage. We're quite comfortable that they are covered by the Federal Tort Claims Act, and the solicitors at the department that we spoke with are also comfortable with that.
This lawyer will get to last week.
I have to disagree with that because I work with those solicitors and there is no resolution within the department. What was done was some language in the AFA about the coverage of volunteers was removed in order to leave it neutral so that a decision could be made. But in the meantime, there is no decision. And I'm the person who reviews the tort claims when they come to the department for the National Bison Range.
There was a,
We'll leave that.
All right, I'm going to shoot for the last word on this. This, as you can see, has been an ongoing source of disagreement, but I do want to make it clear that we spoke with the solicitors directly and we're assured about this, so I want to make people comfortable with that.
Actually, I wanted to address the question about whether other tribes are interested in pursuing the same idea of certain functions on maybe other refuges, and I think the way you phrased it then is we're leading the charge somewhat in that effort, coordinated effort. Well, I kind of chuckled a little bit because it seems like that here lately I've been putting out a lot of malicious rumors, but so this is just another one. I know last night another gentleman asked if we had some sort of an arrangement with Gail Norton to, that she would go along with this if we would talk to the other tribes and get them to lighten up on her on the Cobell lawsuit. And so anyway, and that I just said, I don't know where they come from, but that's just absolutely, I have not talked personally, the staff has talked to Gail Norton, to my knowledge. And this is just another one of those. I'm not aware of any other tribes that may be interested, and if they are, well, again, we're not leading the charge on that effort, but if they were, I've said this, they would have to go through the same process that we did. They would have to show us the cultural, the historical, and the geographical connection, and they would have to go through the same process that we did. So if anybody's thinking that they might just start rolling off these like a printing press, that it just won't happen. They'll have to go through the long, arduous process that we did.
I think one of your questions was regarding the management function as listed in Attachment A that the Salish Kootenai tribe would perform under this AFA. And that part of all the activities refers to the role of the tribal coordinator position, as the tribal coordinator position oversees the employees of the tribe performing the activities in the various programs. That tribal coordinator would work and coordinate with the Fish and Wildlife Service, with the refuge manager or his designees, and then supervise those employees assigned to the AFA through the tribe's AFA.
I think the real question is the management programs that were selected. There could have been, and how come you selected 11 people instead of 5 people to include in the AFA, or 12 people instead of 6 people, and how come you selected the biological program and this and that program instead of other programs?
Thanks. Let's start with the fact that we have an agreement in hand. The Fish and Wildlife Service and the tribe spent 15 months, are described here, but actually this process for the tribe started under the provisions of the 1994 provisions about 10 years ago. So we've been interested in pursuing this for some time, and I just view this as an education process. Of course, the tribe was initially put in, there's no secret, I don't believe, for the management of the National Bison Range. Where we end up in this first AFA, I think, is a good step. And I think in the negotiation process, quite simply, the Fish and Wildlife Service and the tribe settled on an arrangement where the tribe will perform the again, as the legislation requires us to describe as functions and activities. While we certainly have some obvious disagreement in some of the language in the AFA, we simply pursued all of the activities and functions that are available to perform at the National Bison Range Complex. And so in the drafting of the documents, and the Fish and Wildlife Service took primary lead in most of the drafting of the documents, proposed exactly how that would look. And we settled on that. So it really was part of the negotiation process. And the tribe is looking forward to doing just what the AFA says in all of those activity areas. It seems a little bit like a vague answer, but it really just was part of the negotiated process. And we pursued all of the activities, and to the best of my knowledge, except for some of those that the law doesn't allow us, such as law enforcement, to perform, we are going to be involved in basically all of the activities and be responsible for performing those activities under this AFA.
As Clayton said, it was an intensely negotiated process over 15 months that led to the draft that you see today. It's a draft subject to your comments. We didn't always agree. There was a lot of push and shove and give and take throughout the discussions, and the end result is what you have before you. We never set out to say, okay, this position and that position and that position. We negotiated on the basis of functions. And the Fish and Wildlife Service retained the management oversight function of each of the programs: maintenance, visitor services, biology. And we did provide the full measure of our fire program, on-site fire program, that is also subject to broad zone fire management oversight, which is common for all of our national wildlife refuges. So that fire management, which we've been doing jointly with the Sage-Scootee tribe for many, many years, that would continue. They're going to take over the entirety of the on-site fire program, and our zone fire management officer in Missoula will provide sort of zone oversight of that program along with the other refuges in this part of Montana. So we did not set, as your question said, which positions, why did you decide on these and not these? We negotiated on functions, and what you see is the end result.
Any other comments? I'm inviting another speaker to come to the microphone.
I'm Dale Palmer from Charlotte, and I'm going to save 1.5 minutes for the next question or two down the road a ways after the others have had a chance to respond. So far, the conflict between the National Wildlife Refuge Administration Act and the Indian Self-Determination Act has not been clearly explained to us yet. We would like to have a clear answer on that. Would somebody please respond to that? I can hear your voice pretty good. Would you do that for me?
I would like to remind our representatives to keep the mic close to our mouths so it will project.
I guess I don't have to answer. You asked, what is the conflict between the Indian Self-Determination Act, and I think that would be specifically the Tribal Self-Governance Act, which is what we're talking about here tonight, and the Refuge Administration Act. And I don't believe there is any conflict if the AFA is properly drafted because the Wildlife Administration Act requires the Secretary of the Interior to manage, administer national wildlife refuges. But there's nothing in the act that says that some things couldn't be contracted for because they could be done by just about anybody that don't involve policy making or a balancing of judgments. And I believe that that's what we put into the annual funding agreement. The types of activities, like going out and fighting a fire, you can hire people to go out and do that. They don't make policy judgments along the way. They're told what to do and how to do it. And that's part of the program that we're contracting for here. Maintenance, the same thing. If you have a vehicle on a refuge, you don't have to have a federal employee to fix it. You can take it down to the local garage and pay them to fix it and bring it back. And nobody's ever going to say that the result is going to be any different as long as the quality job is done. And same thing with visitor services. You have a program that you could hire people off the street. They wouldn't have to be federal employees and tell them, this is what we want you to do, this is how we want you to behave toward the public, this is generally what we want you to say. And a citizen would know the difference when they came in, whether it was a federal employee or whether it was a contractor following the same script. So essentially, there's no conflict as long as we draw the line in including activities where the line should be drawn, and we don't go over that line. Now, if we go over the line and the tribes would get to decide how the bison were going to be managed and how the weeds were going to be managed and the grazing was going to be managed and whether there would be a fence or not. Those are, you start to get into decisions that are going to affect the resource and that likely are have to remain under the direction and control of the secretary. But there's no conflict as long as you find the line where the decisions or the actions that are being performed could be done by just about anybody and no one would know any difference. Does that make any sense? Did you hear me?
I have a question later on, but I'll save that for now.
Okay. Thank you.
Another first-time speaker, please to the microphone.
My name's Dan Brister. Since the AFA pertains to lands of special geographical, historical, and cultural significance to the tribes, we're recognized as a sovereign nation, and these are their ancestral lands that have belonged to the tribes for thousands of years. Why does the Fish and Wildlife Service retain ultimate management authority over these lands and the bison? The second part of my question is, how did these lands come to be owned and managed by an outside government in the first place? And third, how much money did the tribes receive for the nearly 19,000 acres that we're talking about here? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let me touch on how the Bison Range became owned and managed by the National Wildlife Refuge system by the federal government. Through an executive order, the lands were designated as National Wildlife Refuge, and the tribes were paid for that in 1908. And then subsequently, in the 1970s, the CSKT took the federal government to court and won an award that basically said that they were not paid enough for it in the very beginning, initially in 1908. And that settlement was, the second settlement was in excess of $2 million, which included an adjustment in the price plus interest over those years between 1908 and the 1970s. Okay. And why does the Fish and Wildlife Service retain management? Again, the Refuge Administration Act authorizes that through an act of Congress.
Did we cover all your questions, sir?
How much was given in 1908? Do you remember that? I believe it was $35,000 or $30,000. Thank you.
Another speaker, please. First time?
First time and last time. I'll try to do this in 2 minutes. How many questions can I ask? When am I done? Is that right? Well, I'll ask you, how many reports you participated in this?
The process, even the fundamental idea. And then number 3 is, I wonder that because of whatever answer I get to the first 2 questions, if there would be any reluctance for us to call for full and open congressional hearings in detail of this proposal, with the process to be held in abeyance until those hearings are over. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I was the head of the Fish and Wildlife Service negotiation team. I participated on that team beginning last May, and I am still the head negotiator of that team. There were other members of the team as well. We included on the team Dave Wiseman, who was the refuge manager from the refuge. We felt it was appropriate to have that on-site knowledge, and he did his very best to represent the knowledge of what's going on at the Bison Range, Nine Pipe and Pablo. I am held accountable for my performance as a federal employee, and I'm also held accountable as a member of the Fish and Wildlife Service, as a member of the executive branch, and I'm held accountable by the Constitution to execute the laws passed by Congress. And so I did my best effort to execute the Indian Self-Governance Act, Title IV aspects of that, and the Refuge Administration Act. The Indian Self-Governance Act and the regulations associated with that require me to bargain in good faith throughout this process. And I believe that I did so, as did the rest of the members of the team. The question about who made the decision not to allow for public input, public awareness, public involvement. Since we're in the middle of a public comment period, you might be referring to what happened prior to the public comment period, because we are in a 90-day public comment period. The promise of that 90-day public comment period was made to you by Deputy Assistant Secretary Paul Hoffman last year in a public meeting. And we are honoring that 90-day comment period right now. We are here tonight and last night to answer questions, and we are continuously seeking public comment, public input, and advertising in as many ways as possible that opportunity. So I hope to dispel the concern that we are not interested in public comment. We are. And the more significant, more substantial, more specific comments you can make, the better. Because those comments will have meaning to the process. We pledge to you to read each and every comment, to consider those comments fully, and to the degree that those comments require us to make adjustments to the AFA and negotiate further on the AFA, we will do so. As far as a full and open congressional hearing, that is outside of my purview. Constitution says that executive branch members cannot request a congressional hearing. That is something you, the electorate, the general public, have that opportunity along with Congress.
Any other comments? Do we have another person, a speaker, first-time speaker? First-time speaker. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Pat Jameson. During 2003, the Fish and Wildlife Service and the nation celebrated the centennial of the National Wildlife Refuge System. It was in part a realization that we could not and should not continue the indiscriminate destruction of fish and wildlife which was occurring back in 1903. One effort to reverse the shameful treatment of our natural resources was the establishment of the National Bison Range in 1908 to help to protect an animal important to the heritage of all Americans. This continued the successful efforts of individuals such as Michelle Pablo and Charles Allard that kept the bison from going extinct. My question is to each of you individually and personally. After 96 years of keeping this small patch of prairie, as well as our heritage, alive with bison, do you feel that the Fish and Wildlife Service did a good thing in establishing the National Bison Range in 1908? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I feel that the Fish and Wildlife Service has done a lot of good things throughout our nation to protect the resources of fish and wildlife for all of us to enjoy. Rick started off by starting with Pelican Island and all the uniqueness of the areas that they manage throughout the country. I do think that was a good thing that they did to preserve the bison. But I also think in that context, there's a lot of things also too. I'm really, I feel like that we've done our part as a tribe. In 1981, we established 98,000 acres of wilderness, the first one in the United States of private, wilderness, the very first one. And I think that was something that was unprecedented. Well, it was unprecedented at the time, a private landowner to set aside that amount of land for the resource. And it's similar in nature because I think there's a lot of uniquenesses that we protect and preserve. So I feel like that we work hand in hand in protecting and preserving those resources for all of us.
I'm very proud of what the Fish and Wildlife Service has done in managing the National Bison Range, Pablo, and 9 Pike National Wildlife Refuges, as well as the other 540 National Wildlife Refuges across the system. We do have a few other refuges in the system that have bison, but no other refuge in the National Wildlife System has management and sustained population of bison as its primary purpose. Recently we did a sampling of the genetic makeup of all of our bison on all of our National Wildlife Refuges. And the Park Service did some sampling of some of their bison on national parks. And it was very interesting to see that the bison on the National Bison Range have the best genetic material of any herd that has been sampled to date. And by best, I mean that these bison are the most wild of any bison herd in the United States. What would make a bison not a wild bison? Well, there are times over the last 100 years where bison have been mixed around, and sometimes cow genes get into the system from various ways. And so we have been looking carefully at trying to manage our herds to sustain a wild bison herd. And by that I mean bison that are wild genetically and bison that behave wild as and act as a wild bison herd. And we have a tremendous example of that at the National Bison Range. Due to the hard work for 96 years of dedicated employees. So we bring that resource to the table as well, and we negotiate on this annual funding agreement with a sincere effort and concern that we intend to continue this as a shining example for the nation to be proud of. And so we kept that in our minds foremost as we negotiated in this annual funding agreement.
Yes, I think the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service did a wonderful thing establishing the National Bison Range. It has been referred to by people around the nation as one of the crown jewels of the National Wildlife Refuge System. So it's well known, it's been well managed. The bison herd is, as Dr. Coleman mentioned, is one of the most genetically diverse and pure strains of wild bison in North America.
The National Bison Range is unique in being the only National Wildlife Refuge established specifically for bison, and I can echo those same thoughts about the genetic purity and uniqueness of the bison themselves. So yes, I feel that that was a very good thing that the Fish and Wildlife Service did.
Lawyers don't know that much about bison. I do know, however, that I've been there any number of times, and the annual bison roundup is a thrilling experience and is extremely well done by some very dedicated people. I was very impressed. In fact, I was impressed enough with the National Bison Range. My brother's family was coming up this way. They stopped in, and they were very impressed. So how can you not be impressed by a place that's that well run? And as Rick said, when we were working on the annual funding agreement, our goal was to do the agreement in a way that would preserve that.
I guess too, we could have done one better. We could have left Charles Allard and Michelle Pablo alone to run those bison freely up and down the valley, and the whole reservation would have been one huge bison range. But we carved it up and put fences and homesteaded it and done other things and told them that they could no longer free-roam their bison. So unfortunately, we ended up with a smaller bison range in the whole reservation.
Do we have another first-time speaker?
I spoke last night, but I'm going to talk a little bit different tonight. Hope nobody calls a point of order on me. You know, I hope that in these discussions and deliberations, we consider the whole, and that is what that bison range is and how it can be enhanced by what will happen with tribal ownership, tribal management, ownership. The land belonged to us originally. If we take a look at what is there and what's proposed, we not only can talk and echo what you gentlemen just said about it being nationally recognized, we can incorporate all of the attributes of the tribal wildlife, wilderness, and the history of the Salish Kootenai people into that. It's very significant. People come to that range. People come to this area. People come to the reservation, in part, to find the history of the Salish Kootenai people. This can be that kind of an opportunity. It can be an opportunity for our 7 public school districts to have access to a living museum of wildlife, of history, of culture, and I think it's appropriate that our people be intimately involved in the discussion and in the presentation of that thing that we're presenting to the public as the crown jewel. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another first-time speaker? We can't, there's no question. We can only respond to questions. You're welcome to use your 2 minutes, but we will only respond to questions.
Yes, hi. My question is, have these genetic studies been published in a scientific peer-reviewed journal? And my other question is, it seems to me that all this talk about the bison being this great symbol of wildlife in the refuge is not consistent with the way that the bison are actually managed. And by that, I'm talking about the roundup, the enclosures, preventing the free roaming of the bison throughout the range. And it seems to me that they're treated like cattle rather than wild animals. And so my question would be, is the annual roundup really necessary to ensure the health of the animals? Is there some other way to do it? And it seems to me like it's more of a ranching activity than a wildlife management activity. And I want you to respond to that critique.
Thank you very much.
The annual roundup is a vital management tool for the health of this bison herd. During that time, the surplus animals are removed off of the range to ensure that the habitat can sustain a healthy, not only a healthy herd, but the habitat itself remains healthy. There are fences that are inside of the National Bison Range, but again, those are used to constrain the herd in certain grazing strategies in order to manage the habitat, the vegetation, so it remains healthy, so that this herd can be sustained for the long term. As far as how the bison are actually rounded up and handled during that time, it may appear like a cattle operation, but with the given terrain of the National Bison Range, it's the most effective way of bringing those animals into the roundup, the corral area, so they can be not only culled where the excess are sold, but also where the animals can be tested for diseases, where the animals can be tested for genetics, and where we can identify individuals for more intense management. In fact, there are herds, a handful of herds across the nation. There was a small herd in Iowa at the Neil Smith National Wildlife Refuge. And several years ago, they requested that the National Bison Range send its employees down to that refuge in order to show them how to handle the bison, safely handle them and manage that activity. So the expertise is there, and it's recognized and utilized in this case in other parts of the nation. Yeah. It's our intent to publish that genetics study that's part of a doctoral program down at Texas A&M, is that correct? So that will be published.
It's just about time for our break. So we'll take 15 minutes. Thank you. Since many of you joined us after our introductions at, give or take, 6 o'clock, we'd like to do that again. And I'm going to pass the mic so that staff can be introduced to you. And I'll turn the mic over to Chairman Matt to begin that. And when the introductions are finished, then I'll quickly go over the little ground rules about the 2-minute clock. All right? Chairman Matt.
Okay, I'll just state again that, as I said to start off with, I have this distinct honor and privilege to serve the Tribal Council as their chairman. And with me today, to my right, is Brian Upton from our legal staff. And next to him is Clayton Matt, head of the Natural Resource Department, and Tom McDonald.
My name is Rick Coleman. I'm the Assistant Regional Director for Fish and Wildlife Service for refuges in the Prairie and Rocky Mountain region. It encompasses 8 states, 134 refuge units in those states. To my left is Steve Callan, the Refuge Manager of the National Bison Range, Pablo, Nine Pipe, and other refuges. Next to him, Steve Berenson, Refuge Supervisor for all the National Wildlife Refuges in Montana, Utah, and Wyoming. And on my far left, Al Kaczynski. He's the solicitor in the Denver office of the Department of Interior Solicitor's Office.
I got a question the other night, I think I need to answer it here. People say, what's a solicitor? We're attorneys. Someone, when they started the office, decided they'd call us the Office of the Solicitor because it sounds kind of cool, instead of just, there's a bunch of attorneys. But I'm really an attorney. People call me a solicitor. I can get in trouble with that sometimes, probably, but we're just attorneys.
And I am Jennifer Carter. I'm your facilitator this evening, and I'm not affiliated with either organization. My job is to guide the meeting and give everybody an opportunity to ask questions and make sure we stay on time. So I would like to give you the little bit of ground rules so that everybody knows the same thing. Individuals who wish to ask a question during this question and answer session are to line up or take a seat near the microphone here in the center. All questions must be asked within a 2-minute time frame. And I do have my handy-dandy electronic timer. And after you introduce yourself, I will start the timer, and for 2 minutes. I really urge you to ask all of your questions very quickly. Now, the representatives are going to jot down the questions as quickly as possible. And then you can finish your 2 minutes with anything else you'd like to say. But please cluster them together because the clock will start at 2 minutes and it will continue. And when it goes off, I will rise and very pleasantly interrupt you and ask you to please take your seat. Now, only actual questions will be answered. Rhetorical questions and comments, any kind of verbal comment, will not be answered. You have 2 minutes to ask your questions and say what you wish, and that's just fine, but no comments will be answered by the panel. Now, if you have your written comments ready, we have a box at your far left rear. See, there's Tina at the rear with the green box, and we will gladly receive those tonight. We also have more information on the annual funding agreement out in the hallway on the information table, and urge you to pick up that information too, okay? So 2 minutes it is. I will keep calling for first-time speakers. When I have run out of first-time speakers, then I'll ask for second-time speakers. And we've always got a few eager people who would like to come to the mic again. So, any questions about the ground rules? Okay, first-time speaker. Thank you.
I'm kind of short. I'm one of those flatheads. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good to see you guys all here again. And I think there's even a few more people that I didn't see last night. My name is Karen Coffey, Heavy Runner, and I come from the great state of Montana, and I live on the Flathead Indian Reservation, God's best place on earth. And I want to tell you that I will never leave our reservation. And I want to tell you some things that I have observed. I'm not going to reiterate what I said last night. I'm not going to answer any more dumb questions. I'm going to put it to you guys tonight, okay? Number one, who knows what big medicine is? Both sides? Okay? I know who big medicine is. I want to know, why is the Montana Historical Society having big medicine in Helena and not on the National Bison Range? His remains I'm talking about, stuffed. He could be here on the Bison Range as a tourist attraction, and he should be back home where he is supposed to be. Do you have any plans on trying to return him back to the National Bison Range, no matter under whose control it is in? How many visitors come into the National Bison Range and pay their $3 or $5 or $2? How much money do you take in from the National Bison Range, and where does that money go? We say that here in the state of Montana, tourism is our big thing, and believe me, we as tribal people want the tourists to come on our reservation, observe all our wonderful things, spend their money, and then they can go home, please. Because Montana is the last best place to live, and I want to live here a long time. I'm only 63, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. First person to speak up.
All right.
They got to answer it.
The first question was big medicine. You know, I asked that myself because, you know, as a kid, when we go to the Bison Range, it's the first thing we would do. And as many of you know, the white buffalo is sacred. Big medicine is sacred to the Indian people, and it meant something beyond what we're talking about today. And so when Big Medicine passed away, and thereafter a few years passed, and I just assumed that it was at the Bison Range, the remains, and I understand it was in the attic somewhere in Helena, so I was a little disappointed that the remains that was there too. So, but those of us that grew up there remember going there and seeing them, and it just kind of gave me a good feeling.
I'm not familiar with the events that led to Big Medicine's remains being removed. There are no plans, at least at this point, to look into returning Big Medicine. Not that that's not something we can't look into, but at this point there really haven't been any plans that I'm aware of. You asked how many people visit the National Bison Range. It's over 200,000 a year, and they do pay a entrance fee for vehicles. And honestly, I can't tell you exactly how much that is each year, but it is used to help manage the public programs, the visitor services programs, the maintenance on the tour route, the visitor center, people that help manage that program. Okay. There is someone that does know that off the top of her head, and I could ask Pat Jameson if she would like to shout out the dollar amount.
We average about 50,000 a year. During the years of the fires, it was down to 45,000. We have about 55,000 from 15 months to today.
Thank you. And do you want to elaborate on how the money is used?
Being with the Recreation Fee Fund, the priority is for backlog maintenance, many visitor center items, And then also for enhancement of visitor services, one of the things we started doing with the fee money was dust control on the tour drive, which is absolutely amazing and really improves the quality of the road and the experience. And then staffing helps to seasonal law enforcement and that sort of thing. There's a lot of projects that they went to.
Thank you.
Before I call for another speaker, because there was just a little hint of applause, I will repeat a little part of the ground rules again. During the meeting, no advocacy displays such as banners, signs, shouting slogans, heckling, clapping will be permitted. If any such displays occur, I will stop the meeting until the display ceases. No applause, no gesturing of any kind, please. Thank you. Now, our next first-time speaker. Thank you.
Oops, it came off.
I know, I did that too. It's like a banana clip.
Looks like it. Okay, Rick, could you explain how the money from the Bureau of the Indian Affairs is being paid to the CSKT for this AFA? That question wasn't answered. And two, how come none of this was brought to the public's attention to be voted on? You know, like when we go vote, nothing was ever in a ballot that I ever got to vote on for all this to take place. And number three, to Fred. When you introduced yourself, I started laughing because you were talking about the heritage to kids coming, you know? Well, I've got two girls that are 32 and 33, and from what all the age groups I've ever seen, do they really care? I just haven't seen any kids that I've ever met that really, really care. Like you do, like I do, you know. We are about the same age, I think, and we care about our lands, our properties, our homes. Does the younger generation really care, and are they going to continue caring? Thanks.
Thank you.
During the break, I understand that there was a question about this BIA funding and was not answered. And I'm sorry because I did not hear that part of somebody's question. So during our negotiations over the last 15 months, there was negotiations regarding concerns about issue funds and things like that. And in the process of resolving one of those points of concern or impasse, the Bureau of Indian Affairs offered to provide $30,000 to the first year's annual funding agreement to help defray some of the costs associated with the first annual funding agreement. The question on how come we didn't get a chance to vote on this annual funding agreement, your opportunity, as I see it, your opportunity to vote on laws that are passed by Congress is afforded to every American every 2 years, as far as voting for members of the House of Representatives, and every 6 years, members of the United States Senate. And that is where these laws are made, and they're made by the people that you elect and that I elect. And so that's your opportunity to vote on how you wish laws to be considered and enacted by Congress. So in a sense, in the past, your vote was counted. It did affect the laws that were passed by that Congress. The last one statement, I think, was just a statement.
Well, I will apologize too, because that was one of the things Brian hit me when Susan asked that question. And in fact, during the break, I asked Brian maybe to catch you aside and explain. I do have to say that even though that I was the lead negotiator in this process, that's how we set it up. that I was not at all the meetings, and sometimes at the meetings that I was at, the gentleman on the end, the solicitor, got so boring, no. That, I just spaced off. Some of the things I didn't catch completely, and Brian reminded me that the BIA did commit to the 30,000 in 2005, and we were going to catch these sites, so I'm glad somebody clarified that. With the statement of the children not caring, it's in our society's belief, the Indian people that have raised me and that who we represent, that we have a belief that we're here only for a short period of time, and we are challenged with protecting this place that we hold sacred for our future generations. And in fact, we want to leave it better than we found it. And so whether they have a voice now, their voice is through us as we take care of this place. And so in your mind, they're not here to care, or they're not here to comment, or whether the kids care or not. We care enough for them that we'll make this place better for them. And so I don't know if you understand that.
Well, we all try.
I need that microphone.
I have to say this, we're not supposed to make this personal. It's not a dog fight, but I really have to make this comment. During these negotiations, it was really fun because Fred, man, has a wonderful sense of humor.
Our next first-time speaker.
Hi, my name is Stephanie, and I am 33 years old, and I just want you guys to know that I do care very deeply about the buffalo and about the tribal culture and the people. And I know other children that are younger, that are 8 years old, that are 5 years old, that are 2 years old, and that are also my age, that care very deeply. They come to the park, they love the buffalo, they want to see wild buffalo. And I wanted to make another statement too, that the buffalo in Yellowstone, in fact, are truly the wild buffalo that we have in this country. So that statement earlier was incorrect about the bison range buffalo. Hopefully one day we can take the fences down. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just as a point of correction, the study that was conducted on genetics sampled a very small subset of the Yellowstone herd. And it showed fewer cattle alleles, less cattle hybridization than the national bison herd. However, given the history of the Yellowstone herd and knowing that there were many animals that went from Custer State Park to the Yellowstone herd, and we know that the Custer State Park has one of the highest levels of cattle alleles of some of the bison herds. By saying that the Yellowstone herd is truly the standard or the truly wild herd is really open to debate in the scientific circle. So I just wanted to clarify it. Thank you.
Another first-time speaker.
I wanted to give you three gentlemen a copy of what my question is going to be. I want to know what has changed from the date on the head of this letter. And after I'm done, you can explain what this letter is about. I'm going to read one paragraph. The initial response by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on behalf of the Department of the Interior would have transferred limited non-management personnel to Salish and Kootenai tribes. This proposal was rejected by the Salish and Kootenai tribe because it has failed to provide Salish and Kootenai with any directive management units. The proposal was not in keeping with the tribal self-government statutes and was not one that could be successfully implemented on the ground. We believe that it was a recipe for failure, as it would not have transferred whole program unit the Sedition Kootenai could efficiently administer and for which the Sedition Kootenai would be accountable. I just want to know what has changed from that date and if your opinion has changed from that during the negotiations and why you felt this statement was put in this, and just a little clarification. I don't want to put anybody on the spot. I see who signed it for you, but maybe you can clarify where that came from and what it means. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, being that Jamie and Mel signed this on behalf of me, I think I'll have her. No, but Brian will add to this discussion and give you a little clarification.
It's got a pretty simple answer, really, and Clayton alluded to it earlier in one of his responses to one of the questions. As he said earlier, this AFA does not reflect what the tribes wanted originally, and that's what you see in this letter. The Fish and Wildlife proposed what is on the table in this AFA right now, and at the outset we pushed for more, because we're capable of doing more and we believe the law allows us to do more. The Fish and Wildlife Service didn't change their position. We discussed it more. We're entirely comfortable with doing what's in the AFA. So with respect to what you see here and asking what's changed since this letter, nothing has changed other than that we recognize that Fish and Wildlife Service at this point isn't going to be offering more than what they've offered. We're prepared to take that on, and we're very comfortable that our staff can do it. And we're very comfortable with the working relationship that the tribal staff has with the Bison Range staff. As you know, that's been ongoing for a long time, and we're comfortable we can make this work.
Speaker, thank you.
Hi, my name is Flo Gardpe, and I am a second-year doctoral student at the University of Montana, and I'm in the Fish and Wildlife program, and I'm working on drafting a proposal for my dissertation right now, which is going to focus on bison conservation genetics. And part of my job as a graduate is, oh, and by the way, I just want to mention, my family is Chippewa, Cherokee, and Gros Ventre. I have 3 young ladies, 16, 14, and 11, and they're the reason I'm here because they do care about what happens to the bison. And it's a long story. We could talk about it on a break. I'd like to share that with you. But that's why I'm here as a parent and as a student. But part of my job as a doctoral student is to find every stinking piece of literature that's out there on what I'm going to do my doctoral dissertation on. And I actually happen to have 2 dissertations here from Texas A&M that I pretty much had to go cover to cover and read. And so Rick and the other folks who are from Fish and Wildlife Service, I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with some of the information that you're putting out here, because I do have the actual data here that refutes some of the facts that you're putting out about the bison genetics. And my question will follow. So this is by Natalie Halbert, who studied with Jim Durr. This was just published this last year. It's her PhD dissertation on bison conservation genetics. And I'll read you a brief sentence here. Of the 10 federal populations examined, evidence of domestic cattle mitochondrial DNA introgression was found only in those bison from the National Bison Range. Okay? Also, okay, all right. Also, I've studied the history of Yellowstone bison extensively, and at no time did I find any documentation that there were any cattle introduced from Custer State Park. The only cattle that were ever introduced came from the Charles Goodnight herd, and that's the only documentation I can find. And then Pablo Owl herd and Charles Goodnight. My question to you is the statements that you're making to the general public here about bison genetics, what is your information that you're basing it on? I could actually provide you with a 10-page bibliography of the literature I've gathered regarding those issues, and so could you please explain where you're getting your facts from? Thank you.
Sure. This spring, it was my pleasure to attend a federal Bison conference, which was held at the Badlands State Park. And the information by Durr was discussed, or Durr is the professor. And, you can take out a little snippet of the study, and as you're well aware, it's extensive. There are several studies. But there was a lot of discussion in regards to genetics and its interpretation. And it's an ongoing science. It's an ongoing technology that continues to grow, and we're always learning from that. So there's, your point is well taken. There is a lot of debate in the scientific community, which is what I said before.
What about the yellow stone? You didn't answer that question.
That's information I got at that same conference. That's information that I was told at the same conference.
I want to thank the young lady for bearing with my signals and intervention. If you don't ask your question when you first get up there, I'm going to watch my clock, and when you get to 30 seconds, I'm going to warn you, get your question out. Because when the clock goes off, then I have to interrupt. But you were very gracious in letting me warn you that it was coming. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lee Jones, and I guess I have a little bit of comment that you guys probably will not respond to. I'm also familiar with the genetic research that has been done on federal bison herds. Okay? The data that suggests that there is only cattle genes in the national bison herd is old technology and is older data. The most recent data that has come out of Texas A&M suggests that National Bison Range, indeed, when compared with a small section of Yellowstone, has a very clean genetic composition. Thanks.
Thank you. We have another first-time speaker. Hello, sir.
I guess you can hear me. I'm Larry Copenhaver. I work for Montana Wildlife Federation in Helena. I'd just like to make some comments, or not some comments, I have some questions for you. I'm going to try to avoid making comments, actually. I've got some, based on history of the Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Wildlife Refuge system, wildlife has made leaps and bounds towards recovery in this country. And that's based on consistent management within that system. And with this will be a change from that consistency. And I mean this with all respect to all parties. It'll now be a cooperative between two governments, two parties. And that will bring up a situation where I think there needs to be some things in place. And I'm going to ask, since I haven't read the document yet, please forgive me, it may be already down there in writing. Will decisions based in the new arrangement be open to a NEPA process, National Environmental Policy Act, because it is an adopted act of one of the governments but not the other? The process, when a process structure is in place, if there is any potential non-compliance, what sort of oversight? I know that the Fish and Wildlife Service has oversight, but what is the structure in place to force compliance to Fish and Wildlife Service statistics, or I mean Fish and Wildlife Service directives? And also, in the worst case scenario, what kind of consequences or what kind of culpability will be set up in case the terms of the agreement are violated in the long run? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. First question was, would we continue to comply with NEPA even though there are two organizations, two agencies, two governments working at the National Bison Range? The answer is yes, we will comply with NEPA. We remain the managers of the National Bison Range and Pablo and Nine Pike National Wildlife Refuges, and we are subject to NEPA, and therefore we will continue to be subject to NEPA. Number two was, oh, my mind just went blank. What was it? Compliance. If there are issues as we carry out the day-to-day activities, There will be close coordination between the tribal coordinator and the refuge manager or his designees. And during those coordination meetings, any issues or concerns that the Fish and Wildlife Service might have regarding performance of activities will be brought forward and discussed with the tribal coordinator, and we assume will be that issue will be resolved and understanding will be achieved, and the tribe will better understand how or what we meant by that particular activity. What do we do if that is not resolved? We'll continue to discuss with the tribal coordinator. At some point, the regional office and the tribal council will be brought into the mix to make sure that we are aware of a potential concern on both parts, and we'll seek to resolve that issue.
Just want to echo from a tribal perspective that that's part of what was built into the AFA. If you look at it carefully, there is certainly a structure built into that holds the tribe accountable. And there's a process, so we'll follow that. But with all due respect, and I hope they can take a little joke, that is, on the other hand, if the Fish and Wildlife Service fails their responsibility, we get the rest of it. That part's not in.
Do we have another first-time speaker? First-time speaker? Second-time speaker?
I had one more question. Thank you, Larry, for asking the big question that I wanted to have asked. Why is it when we are looking at the refuge, we are not considering how the CSKT has approached it over the years? There has been a motorized speedway constructed, there's been overhead electrical wires constructed, there has been a gravel pit, there is ongoing agricultural activity that has been called to their attention repeatedly for at least a decade that I know of. I know that they are in the process of correcting some of that, and I also know that one of your CSKT members brought it to my attention that there's still the agricultural issues that are out there. And how is it that you care so much, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but if you care so much about the wildlife and you care so much about the refuge, then why have you done these things that you know are damaging to the environment? And why haven't CSKT people repeatedly volunteered their services over the years? And I would like to have the refuge staff address how many times volunteers from the CSKT have stepped forward to help out in any capacity for any length of time. I'm sorry, but I had to ask that question.
Well, and I'll answer it, or we'll answer it, I guess, the same way we did last night when you asked that same question about the racetrack and the power lines. All but one of those issues have been resolved. I think it's the grazing that hasn't been completely resolved, but we agreed early in the process that we would look and resolve those issues. But those issues were there way before we started this process, so it wasn't something that just recently happened. And I don't think anybody deliberately did something to to damage the environment. It is something that just happened that we worked on to resolve. And let me see, what was the other thing that
Volunteering.
Oh, the volunteering.
The volume of
Well,
volunteering. How much volunteering?
I'll personally say I was a volunteer. Well, maybe not a volunteer. But back in the 70s, late 70s, the Young Adult Conservation Corps did a lot of work in the Bison Range. I was happened to be one of the crew leaders, and we did a lot of thinning of the trees there because they were encroaching on the rangeland, and so the tribe at that time had several crews up there that worked on fence fencing and other projects on the Bison Range, on the corrals, and a lot of different projects. And then also personally, I was involved with the counting of the deer. I think it was trying to think of the wildlife biologist at the time from the college that once a year they'll get with the staff and they'll do head counts on the game. So, and I know a lot of tribal people were involved at that time. I worked for Tom McDonald and a lot of our staff and tribal staff and volunteered to do work there. So maybe it's not so visible as the roundup, but tribal folks have worked many times with staff at the Bison Range on different projects. Clayton, you want to add to that?
In regards to the uses that you mentioned at Pablo and Nine Pipe refuges, most of those concerns have either been corrected or are in the process of being corrected. There remains the agricultural use issues on the Pablo National Wildlife Refuge, and we have been engaged with department heads for CSKT to investigate ways that we can work together to resolve those. So there has been good progress made on those issues.
Do we have any first-time speakers?
I didn't get the rest of my answer. Could someone at the refuge explain over the 96-year history how many times the CSKT people have continuously volunteered? I don't mean in the 1970s, but I mean like right now with, visitor information or whatever.
I'm afraid that I personally could not answer that off the top of my head. There may be, if I could put Pat on the spot, can you give any estimate of volunteerism, description of volunteerism by CSKT members at the National Bison Range?
Of tribal members that actually signed volunteer forms, we've had a few help with the students and visitors at Roundup. I would say probably 1 or 2 every year for the last few years at least. It's one of those things where it's not so much volunteer as the cooperation. The duck banding that goes on, they're not really volunteering, but they're working cooperatively with our biologists. So they don't do volunteer forms because it's one agency paying their people and the Fish and Wildlife Service paying our people, and they work together. So there's a lot of working together in that sense. There's quite a few projects they work on.
Okay, thank you.
Now, do we have a first-time speaker? Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to know how many Indians are working on the staff presently, and in the 96 years, how many have worked on the staff?
Thank you, sir.
Again, the 96-year history, I really couldn't address that. I've been at the National Bison Range now about 3 months, so I can't draw on a great deal of time there. To my knowledge, we have one Native American who works on the Bison Range staff, has worked at the Bison Range for over 2 decades. He's one of our highly valued employees, like all of our employees. So, to my knowledge, we have one.
You have a descendant also, and both are this tribe.
I guess my understanding, it's kind of tough to quantify Native Americans at times. And from what Bill said, my understanding is there are 2, at least if you're including descent. Another individual that was there for quite some time is Native American Dave Wiseman, and I don't know how many others have worked there though.
Another first-time speaker? Any first-time speakers? Great, come right ahead.
I have a question for the tribal panel. If there's someone who can assess the success of tribal preservation areas and maybe describe them a little bit. And I have a question for the federal side of the panel. I guess, how would I word it? Why the Fish and Wildlife Service is so resistant to, I don't know if relinquish is the word, but more jurisdiction to the tribe based on Self-Determination Act. What's the motives, what's the concerns that the Federal Fish and Game have when the Self-Determination Act actually, stated legally that does that make sense? What is the concerns that the Fish and Game or Fish and Wildlife have? Why are you so resistant to relinquish more managerial jurisdiction to the tribes?
I'll answer for the Fish and Wildlife Service. No.
They don't need to answer for us. I appreciate the question because in listening to a couple of the previous questions, I think this gives me maybe a little opportunity to address this in a broad way. Let me work at this a little bit from reverse order here. Success of tribal preservation areas. If you count all of the resources that are still in good shape today in Canada, in Montana, in Idaho, in all the surrounding states, in our Aboriginal territories, and the Aboriginal territories of many of the other tribes, not just the open and unclaimed land, not just the land on the reservation. I think that's a pretty big success story right there. And if you look at the fact that the reservation was reserved by the tribe, with the remainder of the ceded area that was the territory of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes being granted to the United States, I think that's pretty successful in its own right, that we were able to reserve those resources for the benefit of all future generations. So then I think that in more modern terms, if you talk about what we've done since the opening of the reservation, since a lot of those resources were taken away from the tribe, we have also been able to reserve and preserve today over 60% of the land base of the reservation in trust for the tribe and future tribal members. And we work to try to manage all resources on the reservation, from the air to land to water to fish to wildlife, plants and animals included. I think we've been pretty successful at that. And in addition to that, we've done things like set aside 96,000 acres of wilderness, large areas that are tribal preserves, such as our South Fork and Orozo areas that are preserved only for tribal members. We've set aside special management areas around Flathead Lake, along the corridor of Flathead River, and in a couple special areas that we manage for wildlife today, such as the Ferry Basin, elk herd. And in addition to that, we have also been successful at increasing elk herd because of that. And throughout the reservation, in a few places, we have transplanted bighorn sheep, probably in connection, in cooperation with the Fish and Wildlife Service on the reservation. And in a couple areas have very thriving populations of bighorn sheep on the reservation today. So I think while the question is a little bit, maybe have been focused at those kinds of things, I think we need to keep a broad focus and broad perspective on what the tribe brings to the table, not just today, but from the past and what we will bring to the table in the future. Because I think that's what this is really all about. Oh, we've got another comment on it.
All right, finally get the mic. Clay covered a lot of items, and I have a hard time tooting the tribe's horn because a lot of the plans and areas that have been designated, I was one of the authors and the advocates for a lot of the landscapes. But one of the critical things that people miss out on tribal management is that some of the last best habitat is on tribal landscapes, land that the tribes own. The bull trout recovery plans are focusing on the Jocko River, which a lot of the land is real prime habitat and left untouched, and that's why bull trout are still thriving there. And the tribes right now are even going beyond preserving that land, but even further enhancing the bull trout populations there with major restoration projects. We're currently right now reestablishing the natural floodplain on part of the Jocko River system near Arlene. And that's a real leadership role by any government, by any landowner, and I'm really proud that the tribes do that. So I think if anybody has any reluctance on what the tribes can do for management, the tribe staff and the leadership the tribes have shown over the past 30 years has been outstanding. And I think many people have said that before, and I'm not trying to, I'm just trying to say the facts. And that's it. Thanks.
Well, in that, I would like to toot the horn for Fish and Wildlife Service also, because we've said many times that what this relationship is going to bring to the table is better management. I really still believe that in my heart. And incidentally, Tom brings up bull trout, and right now, big concern is for the bull trout. But I remember years ago, when Ron Skates, a good friend of mine, also a Fish and Wildlife Service employee, worked here on the reservation, and he was concerned about bull trout way before it became popular. And in that relationship, he worked with the tribe. We did actually surveys in most of the drainages and was getting population studies. And so I will tip my hat off to that relationship. And I guess that's just a point to say, this is kind of the things that will happen when we work together. And so that's what's promising to me, that we're doing the same things, but it's just in another environment.
I believe you asked a question of our side as well. Yeah, and I believe the question was, why does the Fish and Wildlife Service appear to be reluctant to provide for more of the management aspects of the National Wildlife Refuge in negotiating this annual funding agreement? Does that capture the essence of the question?
Yes.
Okay. The concern we've had, and I stated it earlier, is that we have many laws to execute in the executive branch, and one of them is the Self-Governance Act, and that's what we talked about today, but also the Refuge Administration Act that clearly states that each and every National Wildlife Refuge shall be administered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on behalf of the Secretary of Interior. It doesn't provide for management to be managed by other agencies or anything like that. And so as we enter these negotiations, we have that law to consider, as well as our opportunity and our need to negotiate in good faith opportunities for the Salish Kuti tribe to participate in the management activities, or in the activities, program services, and functions on the refuges within
the flathead reservation, and that's what we do.
Well, I have good news and then I have good news. The first good news is it is our scheduled break, which will last 15 minutes. And when you return, we will break up into our 4 table groups. The representatives will be stationed at those 4 tables, and you are welcome to move from table to table and bring your questions. First-time speakers or 8th-time speakers will be delighted to, yes. This part of our scheduled activities is complete.